Hello, my dear friends. How are you doing? Hope you are having an amazing day and not having to deal with drama. Ready for new stories I have for you today? Let's go to the first one. And don't forget to listen to the end of the story, guys, to hear my insights. Enjoy the stories. And don't forget to like and subscribe. And of course, don't forget to leave a comment. My father married his wife when I was 12, 4 years after my mom died from cancer. My father's wife had a 3-year-old daughter, who, a year into their marriage, was diagnosed with a form of cancer that is tricky to treat. She underwent chemo and radiation, but the treatment did not work. They were told about this alternative treatment that was not offered in any local hospital, and it would require staying someplace else for at least 3 months with her. The treatment itself was also expensive. My father was never wealthy, neither was his wife, and her daughter's father and his family were not in her life. There was only one thing that was easily sold and would make enough money to get started on the journey, and that was my mom's engagement ring. It was left to me in her will and was mine. Before my mom, it was her mother's and grandmother's ring. The great-grandparents helped someone out, and it was a gift that was then passed down because of its value. It was extra sentimental because my grandma was in a nursing home with dementia at the time, and I had no other living maternal family left. My father decided that could be sold to pay for the treatment. I said no. I begged him not to. He and his wife told me her daughter's life was more important and that it would be selfish to keep a ring and let her die. I told my father I would never forgive him if he sold the ring and that he was stealing from me because it was mine. He went ahead and sold it anyway, and I stayed true to my word. I never forgave him. I moved out in March before turning 18 and cut them out of my life. I still hate the two of them and wanted nothing more to do with them again. My father tried to stay in my life, but I told him I hoped he knew he lost his daughter, me, and that I wish it had been him to die instead of my mom. His wife's daughter's cancer has returned, and now they want money that my dad saved for me before he married her. It's not a lot of money at all, but I guess they still have lingering stuff from when she was sick before. I told him that I would not give him the money, and the fact he would ask for it showed that he didn't give a crap about me. His wife told me that it's not about me, it's about saving her daughter's life, and me being hung up on losing a ring that went on to save the life of a child. I told her that ring meant more to me than they did, and that I would never give them any money, so they needed to leave me alone and figure out another plan. My father's parents got involved, and I ended up deleting most of my social media and ignoring them. But then I saw my father's wife while I was grabbing groceries, and she told me I'm evil and sick and twisted, and I should be ashamed of myself. I don't know if it's all just worn me down or what, but I feel like I need to ask, am I the a-hole? I just wonder what they would have done if there was no ring. They stole something that was OP's in the first place. Now they are asking for money yet again that is OP's. The first time, helping was against OP's will with something that was very precious to her. The second? Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. OP should not give in. If OP wants to voluntarily do it out of the goodness of her heart, she can. But she shouldn't be guilted into it and told she's evil if she doesn't. And now let's hear the community's opinion. New from New York says, not the a-hole. Tell her she is lucky you did not file a police report against your dad. OP says, I looked into it, but by the time I was 18, too much time had passed. I kind of wish I had been able to do something before, but I was younger, and while full of anger and hate for them, I was also more naive. Who is Jolly on West says, I would say not the a-hole. Why don't your grandparents step up if they are so concerned? I definitely wouldn't after how your stepmom spoke to you. They will leave you with nothing. Trey Mix666 says, not the a-hole. I understand why you feel the way you do about the ring. I have 2 rings. They were my grandmother's, then my mom's, now they're mine. I wear one all the time. It feels like I have my mom with me. It's very sad that they have a sick child, but it's their child, not yours. You shouldn't have to pay them any money. They should be finding ways to finance what that child needs. I hope you're able to find some closure with this. Ultimately, your own father stole something from you that was very precious to you. That's not right. Edited to add. After some thinking and reading a lot of comments, I've decided they can have the money, and I'm going to make it clear that I never want to hear from any of them again. If nothing else, I need him to do that much. The relationship is done, but the money can be theirs. My wife Catherine and I have been married for 8 years. We dated for 3 years before that in college, and have had our ups and downs like every couple. We're both workaholics, very stubborn, and used to getting our way, which can cause problems if we're not careful. Over time, we've learned when it's best to agree to disagree, and when we really need to sit down and talk things out. Unfortunately, I'm really not sure which we need to do this time. 2 months ago, Catherine gave birth to our daughter, Elizabeth. It was an easy pregnancy other than the vomiting in the first few months. Catherine was able to work up to the week before her due date, which was one of those things we agreed to disagree on. She works in a lab, so had safety concerns, but she did raise practical reasons for staying as long as she did. Another thing we agreed to disagree on was maternity leave. I wanted her to at least take the full 6 weeks off because I figured she would be exhausted. I had accumulated enough paid time off that I could be home as well, so we could work together to really learn Elizabeth and what she needed. She went back after 2 weeks, which was more of a compromise than I expected, but less than I hoped for. I'd say we worked really hard to split taking care of Elizabeth fairly equally. We decided together not to do breastfeeding. With her job, it just wasn't practical, and she didn't seem keen on the idea anyway. Every other day, we alternate who wakes up for nighttime feedings. I go into work later than her, so I take morning duty, but she gets home earlier than I do, so she takes evening duty. During the day, Elizabeth stays with my mother-in-law, who lives with us. When we're both home, we share the workload, and that's where the problem comes in. I've noticed that unless Elizabeth is in active need of something, feeding, changing, a bath, or crying, Catherine really doesn't have anything to do with her. Even if she is crying, unless it's for a real reason, like being hungry or wet, Catherine doesn't do anything to soothe her. I know that babies sometimes cry for no reason, and that picking Elizabeth up every time she cries could reinforce the crying. Shouldn't she at least pick her up and soothe her a bit? Plus, even when she's not crying, Catherine doesn't interact with her. I've seen her reading more than once while holding her, which I guess is fine, but it just seems off. I can't help compare her approach to my own, which is definitely more interactive, doting, or even my mother-in-law's approach, which involves constant talking to Elizabeth, very affectionate. I wonder if this is just a difference in parenting style, or if it's something I need to be concerned about now. And if it is a concern, how do I bring it up in a way that doesn't end with us agreeing to disagree? Either she's suffering with postpartum depression, is what you'd call pragmatic with her parenting, or she doesn't want to be a mother. But if she doesn't want to be a mother, why the hell did she give birth? That poor baby. Physical comfort is actually a need for babies. That needs to be filled, just like changing or feeding. I really don't understand why OP and his wife even have a baby if they are both workaholics who want their own way. You don't really get your own way with children. Sounds like she'd rather be working. And now let's hear the community's opinion. Deleted user says, "Did your wife want a child? She sounded disinterested from the start, but you should really get her checked for postpartum depression." OP says, "My wife is actually the one who suggested we start trying for a child, and we had discussed the topic several times before, and both agreed on at least one child. Do you think it could really be depression? She doesn't seem any different now when compared to how she seemed before Elizabeth was born. Although, in a way, that's part of the problem. Surely there should be some difference, right?" Purdy Owl says, "Your daughter needs to be indulged when she cries. She's not even old enough for that nonsense, spoil the baby holding it stuff. Either your wife is suffering from PPD, or she isn't keen on being a mother. At least from what you've mentioned, those are the impressions I'm getting." Ashur says, "You can bring up getting checked for PPD, and this is going to get downvoted by all the super involved parents. But unless your wife is actively and intentionally ignoring your daughter's needs, I don't see the big deal. Some parents are more practical and less lovey-dovey with their newborns. They're just a crying blob at this point, and it might take a while to actually become affectionate with the kid until it grows a personality. Your wife also sounds very career-oriented, so she has other focuses other than just being a mom. If she's feeding and changing her, the rest of her parenting style is up to her to decide." Update: I will be consulting a lawyer this week. My wife and I decided to place our 3-month-old daughter up for adoption. After posting, I decided to confront my wife regarding her behavior towards our daughter, and she said that she prioritizes her work and just has no connection with our daughter. She said her priority is her career, and our daughter is just in her way to reach heights in her field because she can't give 100% of herself to work. We decided as a team that adoption was our most reasonable option, but could not settle on in or out of family adoption. Update 2. My wife broke the news to my mother-in-law of our decision to adopt just prior to Thanksgiving. She reacted poorly, which is to be expected, and with a great deal of yelling. This did not endear her to my wife, who finds yelling annoying, but attempts to placate the yelling resulted in more yelling. In short, my mother-in-law first blamed her deceased ex-husband for my wife turning out like this, and then myself for our decision. I was called a number of names, learned that my mother-in-law had disapproved of me from the start of the relationship, and otherwise trashed. It went on to the point that Catherine eventually threatened to ensure my mother-in-law never saw our daughter again if she would not be reasonable. That quieted my mother-in-law enough for my wife to lay out how the upcoming months would go. Our daughter was going up for adoption. This was non-negotiable. My mother-in-law, having assisted in her care, could take custody if she so wished. My sister-in-law would be a permissible alternate. Otherwise, we would pursue outside arrangements. As many predicted, my mother-in-law opted to assume custody herself, and we started that process after Thanksgiving. The night of the argument, my mother-in-law took Elizabeth and stayed at a hotel. We offered to pay expenses until such a time that my mother-in-law had proper housing, but the offer was not well received. Shortly thereafter, my sister-in-law called. In the end, she threatened to call the police if we attended the family Thanksgiving. I took my wife out to dinner for the holiday instead. I assume the same threat applies for Christmas holiday as well, but cannot say for certain. Communication from mother-in-law and sister-in-law has been sparse since mother-in-law left. From what we know, she and Elizabeth are staying with my sister-in-law for the time being. Moving forward, we are cooperating as much as possible to ensure the transition of legal custody over Elizabeth goes smoothly. Mother-in-law has thus far refused any and all offers of financial aid, but we are prepared to pay child support if and when the time arrives. Update 3. Almost a year ago, my wife and I reached a mutual decision to transition full care of our daughter to my mother-in-law. This was after the unfortunate realization that we as a couple were not in a position where we could effectively parent. We considered non-relative adoption, but mother-in-law was very insistent she assume custody. At the time, we offered financial aid and assistance. This offer has always been on the table. Mother-in-law refused. Since then, mother-in-law has left the state with our daughter to stay with my sister-in-law. Attempts to contact either of them have been unsuccessful, and they have not contacted us in return beyond a few unpleasant phone calls from sister-in-law. That said, I recently was approached by someone from Child Services. Someone has reported us for child abandonment. From my understanding of the law, this has the potential to be a felony charge. It would devastate our entire lives and careers if we were found guilty. There would be no bouncing back. I suspect it may be someone on my wife's side of the family, as they are the only people with the motive to report us. However, it could be argued that by denying us any contact and taking her out of state, my in-laws have kidnapped my daughter. After all, it is not as though we left her on some stranger's doorstep. We put her in the care of someone who was happy to have her. I'm waiting to get into my lawyer's office, but any outside advice on this matter would be appreciated. I, 24 female, was given up by my parents as a baby because they were both 18 and had no way to properly care for me. I didn't have a very good life until I got into college off of a sports scholarship, and it was then that I decided to investigate my past. I found out that my parents were still together, that they had 2 other kids a lot younger than me, and had overall become very successful in life. I started to feel very resentful, and although I almost reached out, I decided that I couldn't. I still kept tabs on them to see how they were doing, how my siblings are and stuff. When I found out that my mother died, I did attend the funeral a few weeks ago. It was a big funeral, a lot of people attended, but it wasn't packed cause the thing is, other than my hair being jet black, I looked just like my mother did. So when people were leaving, I got spotted by my mother's hysterical great aunt, who assumed I was my mother. I excused myself, but I'm pretty sure I was exposed who I was, cause just a few days ago, my father managed to find me and reached out to me. When we met at a coffee shop 3 days ago, he apologized for having given me up, not reaching out sooner, and ended up crying over not getting to raise me. It's the first time I saw a grown man cry. He asked me if I needed anything, from a car to a place to stay, but I couldn't help but feel like I was embarrassing him. So I said goodbye and left. But I've received a lot of texts and voicemails from him since then, asking why I left early, if I'll meet him again, but I don't feel like I can talk to him. Then I got a phone call from a woman saying she was his cousin and my aunt, and that I should have stayed away because he's inconsolable now, and I'm an a-hole for choosing a funeral to reveal myself. I feel like my aunt is right, because all I've done is brought him new grief after he just lost his wife. The aunt cousin should not have contacted OP like that. She was OP's mother. Regardless of how much she was in OP's life, her death impacted OP, and she deserves to try and find some sense of closure. It's not OP's fault that she looks like her bio mom, and it seems like OP went without any intention of causing a problem. I think that OP should at least have one more conversation with her bio dad when she feels ready. And now let's hear the community's opinion. K-No B says, "Not the a-hole. I feel bad for you and your biological father, honestly. This is just a tough situation. Your aunt should seriously shut up." Deleted user says, "Not the a-hole. You didn't ask your aunt to out you. She is the a-hole by telling your father. The cat is out of the bag now, so I do think you need to communicate and not shut him out. You did kind of bring this on yourself. It's an unintended consequence. By going to the funeral, which was an honorable and right thing to do, you did create a situation where this could occur. I do think you need to see this through. I'd suggest you try to ignore everyone else and just talk to him and tell him you didn't mean to reveal yourself at the funeral. You just came to quietly pay your respects, and now things have escalated." Vet for Pot for All says, "Not the a-hole. You had a right to be at that funeral. You didn't make a scene. You didn't involve yourself in the funeral process. Someone saw you. It's their reaction to your being there that people are complaining about. You have absolutely no control over how people are going to react to any given situation. Definitely not the a-hole. As for building a relationship with your father, I do believe he is reaching out to you in his grief since you do look so much like your mother. I'm sure he's feeling guilty too for having put you up for adoption. It's up to you whether or not you'd like a relationship with him. But from what I'm getting in your writing is that he's well off now, and he'd buy you the moon if you'd give him a second chance. If you're up to owning the moon, you might want to give him a chance, but that's up to you." Update. The first thing was my aunt, Dad's cousin, phoned me like the day after and apologized to me. She told me she practically raised my dad, and seeing him like he was made her act without thinking. She told me my dad wanted to see me again and would appreciate it if I would meet her too. I told her how hurtful what she said was, and I needed time before seeing her, but did agree to meet him. Fast forward a week, I go to meet my dad. I kept rereading everyone's advice and using it to prepare what to say. He was more composed. I told him it hurt me so much to be abandoned, and it hurt seeing how successful he was, and it made me feel not wanted, and meeting him made me want to be forgotten. He told me he never forgot about me, and showed me a small baby photo of me he keeps in his wallet, and told me he still sees me as his baby, even though I'm grown. He told me he and my mom used to cry for me every day after giving me up, but they still prayed for me every day even until the end. He once again told me whatever I wanted, he could give me if I'd let him. I told him I wanted no money or anything from him, and I didn't intend to reveal myself. He told me it was okay if I wanted nothing to do with him, but asked I be a part of my mom's great-aunt's life as she hadn't stopped asking about me since exposing me, and gave me her address. He insisted I was always wanted, but he always thought I'd been adopted and didn't want to ruin my life. And that's something a lot of you said, so I was prepared for it. He asked me to forgive him for not being there for me, and said he'd do whatever to be my dad. I guess I realized I could push him away, or finally have what I wanted. I told him my teenage fantasy that he'd come save me from the orphanage, and we both started crying. He told me we can save each other, and I hugged him and forgave him. Since then, I started seeing him more, visit my great-great-aunt every other day. She started calling me by my baby nickname she had for my mom. My dad also started coming to the gym that me, my fiance, and my best friend started after grad. He's been trying to do all the dad stuff I missed out on that we can still do, like teaching me how to drive, business advice and stuff. I also finally don't feel upset over my siblings getting a better life than me. He also got us both into counseling, and I've finally been able to talk about all my years in the system before I aged out. He is hosting a New Year's party and asked me to come so I can meet all my relatives, cousins, and siblings, and yes, I am going.